All right, so today we're going to dive into something pretty big that's happening in college football right now, and I'm sure you've heard about it. It's Coach Deion Sanders from the University of Colorado. He's got this idea that's kind of turning heads in the sport. He wants to change up how college teams handle their spring practices.
Yeah.
Instead of those traditional spring games where a team just plays against itself, he's suggesting they have actual games against other colleges.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold move, and it's getting people talking for sure. I mean, spring football has always been kind of this, internal thing. Teams focus on themselves, get ready for the season, and now Sanders wants to shake things up.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really interesting is that right now the NCAA rules actually don't allow these kinds of games between teams in the spring. So for everyone listening today, we're going to really break this down. We want to understand what Coach Prime is thinking, what the benefits might be, and of course the challenges that come with it.
Absolutely. We've got to look at all sides of this. So we've been digging into articles and reports that lay out Sanders's proposal. We've also looked at the NCAA regulations that are kind of in the way right now. Plus, we've got some reports that talk about, the practical stuff, like what it would actually take to put on an event like this, and even some guesses about which teams might be up for playing in this kind of game.
That's awesome. So let's get started. At the heart of all this is Deion Sanders' vision. And he's not just talking about little changes to the spring game. He wants to completely transform it. It's about having real competitive games against other college teams, maybe even doing some practices together beforehand. Kind of like what you see in the NFL preseason.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting is how he's targeting some pretty fundamental aspects of college football. It's not just change for the sake of change. It feels like he's addressing some long-standing issues.
Right. And for our listeners, let's look at his main arguments. So first off, he's all about better player evaluation. He says that by playing against different opponents, teams with different strategies and players, his coaches can really see what their players can do when they're faced with something new. It's one thing to perform well against your own teammates in practice, but going up against a completely different team, that's a whole other challenge.
That's so true. I mean, you get used to your own teammates, their moves, their tendencies. But when you face a new opponent, it's a real test. You have to adapt, think on your feet. And for the coaches, it's a chance to see how their players handle pressure and make decisions in a game-like situation. They might even discover some hidden strengths or weaknesses that they wouldn't see in regular practices.
Exactly. And then there's the fan experience. Let's be real. Coach Prime knows how to put on a show. And he thinks these games would bring in way bigger crowds and, in today's world, get better TV ratings. Instead of just a few thousand fans in the stands, we could be talking about a packed stadium and a national audience.
And you can't underestimate the importance of fan engagement for college football. It's crucial for ticket sales, donations, media deals, the whole financial side of things. A more exciting spring game could be a big boost for the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And then his third argument is about recruiting and getting the program more attention. He believes that having these televised scrimmages would be a great way to show off his team and the talent he's bringing in. It could help attract top recruits who are still deciding where to go. It's like having a primetime event in the spring, and that kind of exposure is priceless when it comes to recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Spring is already a busy time for recruiting. Coaches are out there scouting players or visiting schools. If you add a high-profile televised game to the mix, it just amplifies everything. It gives programs a chance to stand out, and for recruits, it's a chance to see the team in action in a more real game situation.
Makes sense. But before we get too excited about all the possibilities, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the NCAA rules. Right now, they specifically say that teams can't have practices or games against other four-year colleges during the spring. It's a pretty clear rule.
Yeah, and the NCAA has their reasons for these rules. Player safety is a big one. They want to limit the amount of contact and the number of games to reduce the risk of injuries. They also want to keep things fair by preventing teams from sharing too much information. If you're always scrimmaging against each other, you might accidentally reveal your playbook or your strategies.
Right. And we can't forget about the whole transfer portal situation. The NCAA is worried that if players and coaches from different teams are interacting too much outside of the regular recruiting periods, it could lead to tampering, trying to poach players from other teams.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. But at the same time, some people argue that these scrimmages could actually be safer than some of the intense practices teams already do. If everyone agrees on the rules and limits the contact, it might not be that much riskier.
That's true. And it's worth noting that the NCAA isn't exactly set in stone. Things are changing all the time. There are lawsuits and discussions about updating some of the older rules, so there might be some wiggle room, maybe even an openness to trying new things.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. The NCAA is not this unchanging entity. There are people pushing for modernization, trying to adapt to the new realities of college football. And I think Sanders' proposal is definitely adding to that conversation. It's forcing people to rethink the old ways of doing things.
Okay, so let's say for a minute that the NCAA actually does give this a green light. What would it take to make this happen in spring 2025, specifically for Colorado? We're talking about some serious logistics here.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot more complicated than just showing up and playing. So first off, there's scheduling.
Yeah.
Colorado already has their spring games set for April 19th, 2025. So any scrimmage against another team would have to happen around that date, and it would also have to work for the other team's schedule. Finding a time that works for everyone is the first hurdle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then there's the venue. Colorado's home stadium, Folsom Field, seems like the obvious choice. It's got the space, the infrastructure, everything's already there. But what about the visiting team?
Right. They'd have to figure out how to get everyone there, the players, coaches, staff equipment. It could involve flights, hotels, all that stuff. And what about a pep band? To really get the crowd going.
Yeah, for sure. Then there are safety protocols. They'd have to agree on the rules for the practices and the scrimmage itself, how much contact is allowed, what kind of plays are off limits. The priority has to be keeping the players safe, even though it's an exhibition game.
Absolutely. Both coaching staffs would need to be on the same page. They'd have to come up with clear guidelines that protect the players while still making it a valuable experience for both teams.
And of course, we can't forget about TV coverage. With Deion Sanders involved and the whole novelty of this event, you can bet networks like ESPN would want to broadcast it.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer of logistics, but also opens up a huge opportunity for exposure and potential revenue.
No doubt about it. The sports media world is always hungry for something new and exciting, and this would definitely be a hot ticket. It's a first-of-its-kind event with a big-name program and a coach like Deion Sanders. It's a recipe for great TV.
So now let's talk about the dream matchups. Who could we actually see going up against the Buffaloes in this spring showdown? There's already been a lot of buzz about potential opponents.
And what makes this so fascinating is the different narratives each matchup could bring. The stories behind the teams, the coaches, the history.
Like Syracuse. Their coach, Fran Brown, is all in on this idea. He's even publicly said he'd bring his team to Boulder. That's a pretty strong commitment right there.
Yeah, the idea of two new coaches, both known for their innovative styles going head-to-head, that would be a really cool matchup. It would be fresh, exciting, and definitely get people talking.
Absolutely. Another name that Sanders himself has mentioned is North Carolina, coached by Mac Brown. That would be a clash of generations and styles.
Yeah.
A legend like Mac Brown going up against a cultural icon like Deion Sanders.
That's a headline-grabbing matchup for sure. It would appeal to a wide range of fans. You've got the old guard versus the new guard. It would be a must-watch event.
Then there's the possibility of Prairie View A&M. This one's really special because it's an HBCU program, and Sanders has deep ties to HBCU football. It would be a historic moment, a celebration of HBCU football and its impact on the sport.
It would go way beyond just a game. It would be a cultural event, a recognition of HBCU history and talent. It would resonate with so many people.
And let's not forget about regional rivalries. Teams like Nebraska or Utah make sense for a few reasons. They're closer to Boulder, which makes travel easier. And they've got existing rivalries with Colorado. So even a spring game would have that extra edge.
Yeah, bringing those regional rivalries into the spring could really amp up the excitement. It gives fans a taste of what's to come in the fall season, and it builds up the anticipation.
And finally, we can't rule out other big programs from the Power 5 conferences. Some schools like Texas and Ohio State have already been experimenting with different spring formats. So if the NCAA rules change, they might be open to this kind of inter-team scrimmage.
Yeah, those programs are already showing that they're willing to try new things to innovate. So if the rules allow it, they might be the first to jump on board.
So we've talked about the vision, the obstacles. Now let's get to the heart of it. Why is this a good idea? What are the potential benefits of these inter-team spring games? What's in it for college football as a whole? And for you, the listener, what's the takeaway here?
Well, from a coaching perspective, the biggest advantage is better player evaluation. When you play against different teams with different styles and players, you get a much clearer picture of what your own players can do. It's like a real game test. And for younger players, it's invaluable experience. It helps them develop their skills and learn how to perform under pressure.
And for the fans, it's just more exciting. Let's face it, watching your team play against another college is way more interesting than watching them scrimmage themselves. It's a chance to see the team in action earlier in the year and get pumped for the season. Plus, for the universities, it's a great way to promote the program and maybe even sell more season tickets.
And then there's the financial side. Ticket sales concessions, broadcasting rights, all of that could bring in a lot of extra money for the schools. And that money can be used to improve the football program and other athletic departments.
And when it comes to recruiting, this could be huge. High school players are looking for programs that are innovative and get a lot of exposure. So playing in these televised spring games could really make a difference when it comes to attracting top talent.
Our research also showed that there could be some other benefits too. For smaller programs, getting to scrimmage against a big-name school could be a financial windfall. They often get guaranteed payments for those games. And it could also mean better TV ratings for spring football, which usually doesn't get a lot of viewers.
Yeah, and then there's the mental aspect. Getting players into that competitive mindset earlier in the years can be really helpful. It prepares them for the regular season, and it creates a more intense and exciting atmosphere within the team. Plus, it gives coaches a chance to see how their players perform in a real game situation and make adjustments.
It's like turning spring practice into a more dynamic and beneficial time for everyone, the players, the coaches, the fans. It's not just about going through the motions anymore. It's about getting ready to compete at the highest level.
Right. But we also have to be realistic. What are the potential downsides, the challenges that come with this idea?
Well, the biggest concern is probably injuries. More contact, more games means a higher risk of players getting hurt. And that could affect their availability for the regular season, which is what really matters.
Yeah, that's a valid point. And there's also the risk of giving away too much information. When you scrimmage against another team, they get to see your players, your plays, your weaknesses, and they can use that information against you later on.
And in the world of the transfer portal, there's the worry that these televised games could make players more attractive to other schools. It's like putting them on display. And that could lead to more players transferring, which can disrupt a team's chemistry and stability.
So how do we make this happen? How do we bridge the gap between this vision and the NCAA rules? What needs to happen for Deion Sanders' proposal to become a reality by spring 2025?
Well, I think the first step is for people to speak up. Coaches like Deion Sanders need to advocate for change. They need to get other coaches, athletic directors, university presidents on board and really push the NCAA to reconsider these rules. They need to show that there's a lot of support for this idea within the college football community.
And maybe the NCAA could try some pilot programs. They could allow a few schools like Colorado to experiment with these scrimmages under very strict rules.
Yeah.
It's a way to test the waters, see how it works before making any big changes that affect everyone.
And we can't forget about the power of the fans and the media. If people show that they're really excited about this idea, it could influence the NCAA. They're not immune to public pressure, especially when it comes to things that could make the sport more popular and exciting.
All right, so to wrap things up, we've really gone deep into Deion Sanders' proposal for these NFL-style spring scrimmages in college football. We've looked at his vision, the challenges, the potential benefits, the risks, and the whole NCAA situation.
We've talked about the logistics, the dream matchups, the excitement this could bring, and we've also talked about the importance of player safety, competitive balance, and the impact on the transfer portal.
We've weighed the pros and cons and explored all the angles, and at the end of the day, Deion Sanders' idea is bold. It's a challenge to the status quo. It's about pushing college football forward.
And whether or not it becomes a reality, it sparked a really important conversation about the future of the sport, and that's a good thing.
So here's something to think about as we finish up. What other big changes could benefit college football? What innovations are out there, and what are the biggest hurdles to making those changes happen? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a great discussion.